Good evening. We have here a tinkerer of stories, Saras Manickam, who has worked as a teacher trainer, copywriter, business English trainer and whatnot. I feel Saras has collected some amazingly original stories, and this whole narrative stretches the concept of family, home, sexuality, marriage, and people who themselves become colonies. Her stories are bound by the asymmetry of the socio-economic landscape of Malaysia, a world where desire becomes a battleground for escape. Good evening, Saras.
Good evening.
And welcome to KLF.
Good evening. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, when we explore the world of your stories, we see that Malaysia too is a place that has absorbed many cultures like a blotting paper. People do not often think about the multilingual environment in Malaysia or about the experiences of migrant workers. For us, it is a place we think as a tourist destination. Would you share something that we really ought to know about Malaysian culture and its landscape?
Okay, Malaysia is a lovely country. You know that. We're so good with food, we're good with clothes, with fantastic infrastructure. But when we talk about, in this book, when I talk about people, then I talk about racism, which we can't run away from, or discrimination. And would you like me to read a bit of that?
Yes, of course.
All right. I'm going to read about this word cling. Okay. You may not have heard of killing, but killing is a racial slur against Indians, against dark-skinned Indians, which means South Indians. So it's a racial slur very much along the line of the N-word for African Americans, right? And in this, I'm just going to read a little bit. It was said that 200 years ago, the British shipped Indian prisoners to this country to work in chain gangs. How dark-skinned, how scary those prisoners. Wherever they went, the clinking sounds of their leg irons preceded them. Clink, clink, clink. The locals called the prisoners cling. Over time, the pejorative stretched to include all dark, scary ethnic Indians. This evening, my friend, Makza, who sells the crunchiest, tastiest pisang goreng this side of Kuala Lumpur, who is the bubbliest, warmest person I know, calls me Kling. It slaps my face. I have never been called Kling before. Kling has always been other people. Kling. I should let it go, but I'm rooted to the ground, too stunned to be angry. What did you call me, Makza? My voice is low. She looks away, her mouth set in a straight line, 2 spots of pink high on her cheeks. Kling. I am 36. Tall, slender, chocolatey brown, educated, attractive, even exotic, if you look at me from a certain angle. Kling has always been other people, other Indian Malaysians. Comfortable narratives to feed the disdain of other races. Kling are the darker ones, the stupid, lazy, drunk, fighting on the road ones, the gangsters, the drug pushers, the ones from the estates, from squatter areas, from city slums, low life, dirty, smelly, filthy, black Kling. All the soothing stereotypes that exist inexorable in the minds of others, of landlords who would never rent out to Indians, in mothers who frighten their kids with a black bogeyman. They exist in the hearts of otherwise decent, ordinary folks. They need the cling. I do not know until Ma'za tells me that I too am cling.
I think the mesmerizing lines that you have scripted haunt us down and also haunt the reader. And what I have observed is the narratives, that is with an expectation that you read, but there is the kind of subversion that it takes, and it takes, your stories take an unexpected turn. The endings of Saras's stories are quite intriguing. And would you like to say what impels, what makes you conceive such kind of unexpected endings
It's
for
not
us?
my fault. It's not my fault. It's the characters. You know, as a writer, you think, I know what I'm going to write, and then you write, and then the characters don't play ball. They say, no, you keep your story. We're going to write our own story. And so the story turns into the way that the story needs to turn. If I try to pull it back and say, no, you're the bad guy, I'm going to punish you, then they stop working. They just stop working, the story stops moving, until I recognize that it's my fault. I ought to honor the stories. I ought to honor the characters and give them the space to tell their stories. The storyteller is only a channel, a conduit for the story. It's not my story. So I can't become egoistic about it. Yeah.
There are, in your book especially, My Mother Pattu, what I feel is there are many hidden narratives about marginalized voices in post-colonial societies, as you mentioned, as you read out the lines. Do you believe there is a moral imperative to authentically depict this other, those positioned on the opposite side of the global divide in your narratives?
Actually, I didn't set out to prove anything.
Yeah.
You know, it's like these stories live with us, they grow with us. We know about, we grow up with mothers who had all the talents in the world and who were bound by patriarchy to give up their dreams and were told that's the right thing for you to do. We grow up with migrant workers who are not considered human because they're migrant workers, you know? So these are their stories. I didn't have to make up anything. What I did was look at the newspapers, listen to the old ladies coming to your house to speak and they tell you the stories, listen to your grandma and your grandpa, listen to the stories of the people around you, look at the newspapers, look at people arrested, taken for questioning, and then they die within 24 hours because of perforated ulcers. I didn't make them up. So that's the idea. These stories are all there. What I did was to give them a voice and honor that voice. It's not moralistic. It's not like good people versus bad people. That doesn't work in real life. The victim can also be a perpetrator. The perpetrator can also be a victim. There are two sides to it. The woman who claims casteism, discrimination, the woman who claims discrimination because of her race doesn't want to serve other people because she's not sure of their caste, of the religion, or the race. It works both ways. We're not always one-sided people. We're not always victims. We are the jokers sometimes, yeah.
You mean to say that we can't hate any of them and we need to grow an understanding about them? When it comes to your story, My Mother Pattu, when I looked at the craft, I feel that that story has some kind of connection A very powerful connection
Yeah.
with a personal connection with the author. So,
All right,
would
you
you like to share that with the audience?
The title story won the Commonwealth Prize in 2019. Okay, but it took me 10 years. I'm such a slow, doofus dinosaur. It took me 10 years to write that story because the person who started writing the story had very firm convictions about how the story would move, how it would grow, how it would end. And it didn't work that way because I wanted to punish the mother for being abusive, for being horrid, for being a monster. It doesn't work that way in fiction because I was too full of myself. I was being too moralistic. The story didn't flow. It was so like stick figures. I had to grow as a person, to lose, to grieve, to love, to suffer, to grow as a person before I could appreciate people like Pattu and their stories. So the person who wrote the final version wasn't the person who wrote the first version. And the person who wrote the final version was more empathetic, not compassionate, but more matured. There's so many facets to a person, man or woman. They're not always what they appear to be. And also I wanted to talk, or rather what came out was that people make decisions and sometimes they don't have any agency. And that's why they had no agency in their own lives. Many women here in this book don't have any agency in their own lives. Even if they're loved, even if the husband loves them so much, he finally controls what she has to do, what she can do. So yeah, the lack of agency. Sorry. And so the women go ahead, make their choices, and find that they always have to pay the price.
I think we tend to idealize the family and the sanctity of those bonds, but you have shocked us by showing that family becomes the most oppressive space that becomes normalized for all of us. Even in our movies in India, we are starting to explore these themes where this kind of silent oppression is being normalized. What kind of emotional and intellectual impact were you hoping to evoke in your audience by presenting such a challenging perspective on familial bonds?
No, I was not out to get anything, to tell anything, because the stories are not about me. The moment I started saying, oh, Saras Manickam is a genius, so wonderful, what a lovely writer, the stories don't work. Because the ego comes into play. It's not about me, it's about the stories. And also, it was just giving people a voice. And I think they work not because of me, but because the craft was deliberately, searingly honest. No sentimentality, no romanticism, just honesty.
So how do you see your work contributing to discussions about the expectations and realities that we tend to have?
I have no expectations where people come and tell me, your stories speak to me, because I finally get it and I understand. I read and it's so satisfying that someone tells it like it is without being a victim. I had no intention of writing about victims, of writing to victimhood to show how, look at me, I'm so pathetic. I'm not interested in that. Yeah. Where does that lead us, Talking about real people. Yeah. But I did have people, the main story was anthologized in an American book about the craft of short stories. And one student, when in a Zoom discussion, said, you're talking about my mother. So my mother, he lives in Brooklyn, So it cuts across races, boundaries. I'm glad about that. Yeah.
And could you share, there are many aspiring writers among the audience. They would love to hear from you the kind of struggles that you had as an aspiring writer. I think that will be inspirational for those who are seated here. The kind of...
Wrong role model. I think I can't tell you about sit every day and write every day because I don't do that. You know, life gets in the way. But whenever you write, be prepared to edit a zillion times. The stories were edited, rewritten 1 gazillion times. You know, turning the craft until they speak only with honesty or with authenticity. I wasn't trying to pretend and I wasn't trying to show off. And if you do that, if your stories become about yourselves, then it's not going to work. You can give yourself a pat on the shoulder, but for what? The story is not about you. The story is about the characters, about the narratives. You are a conduit. I believe that you're merely a conduit for the story.
Yeah. What about the craft?
Yes.
What about the craft of your writing?
Yeah, the editing. Oh, okay. When I started writing many, many years ago, they got published, the stories got published. And I thought, this is it, I got it. I'm so clever, you know. I'm a great short story writer. And then I wrote again. And all the stories failed. They got rejected and rejected and rejected because it was about me. The craft of it is you just work at the craft very, very honestly, putting yourself aside.
Yes.
Look at it. I wrote a story and it was perfect. It was wonderful, ready to be sent out. We were talking about that.
Yes.
6 months later, look at it, it's complete rubbish because it's so smug. It was totally smug. And I wouldn't choose it. I wouldn't select it because it's smug. And you don't do smug if you're a serious writer. If you honor the craft of writing, you don't do smug. You do honesty, you know? So yeah, you go back. And I was lucky. I went for creative writing classes and I had wonderful mentors who, the dynamics, the energy between writer and mentor is wonderful. They told me what worked, what didn't work. And if you honor yourself as a writer, you have to aim for that highest thing. You can't say, I'm just a dabbler. That's not fair to your work, you know?
And we live in a world where people are constantly judged and silenced when talking about their opinions on politics, religion, or social justice.
Yeah.
Every time you open your mouth, you face the threat of being cancelled by one group or the other.
Yeah.
I think it has made people more scared to speak their minds or to engage with these crucial topics. As a writer who says that we can't run away from politics and religion, what would you have to say to these young people for whom social media, narrative, and literature are a part of their identity?
I don't know, I'm such a scaredy cat. I live in a very sheltered country. You know, we do not look kindly upon speaking directly to your face about what works, what doesn't work, about racism, discrimination, affirmative action. But I found that you can't run away. If you call yourself a writer, you can't write fairy tales and just keep at that. You have to write about real people. So you can't run away from politics. You can't run away from religion. What you can is to write, is to give the entire picture. I wasn't out to convert people to this or to that. Just wanted to show how it was like. For example, I wrote about affirmative action that gives a scholarship to a certain race and deprives other people, however intelligent or deserving they are of that same scholarship. So one woman came up to me and she said, I was one of the recipients of this very generous scholarship that sent me to England and gave me enough money to holiday in Europe. I had that much money to buy branded clothes. And I enjoyed myself. But I did not realize, or I refused to realize, the cost of that to other races. It's only after reading that story that I realized that I got that fantastic scholarship at the cost of someone else, or many others who had to be put down. So I didn't change her life. I didn't make her a better person. What the story did was to make her a little bit more aware. And maybe that's all you can do, frankly, as writers.
Now it's time for questions from the audience. You can feel free to ask Saras questions.
Madam, good evening. You just talked about how you evolved as a writer and how you became so much empathetic towards the end of your writing. So do you think a writer should efface her identity with the process of writing, or should she, submit herself before the text? What do you think about that while writing something?
I don't know. Where do you come in as a writer? You come in, I believe. Don't take my word. I took ages to write the stories. I think that you are not important. You are the conduit. You're the channel for that story. And you address that story with all of your craft and all of your ability and all of your refusal to push your own agenda. Let the story sing of its own accord. You're just a channel. I believe that.
So how do you bring about your own experiences?
Sorry?
So, ma'am, then how do you bring about your own experiences?
It comes, the craft. It has to come. You can't pluck the story from the air unless you're a genius, and most of us are not. It's from your own experience. And or from what you hear, or what you imagine, and then the craft of it is where you work at showing it up the best you can. I think so. I'm talking as a writer to a writer, Yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Ma'am, my question would be, in the process of writing, how do we somehow make sure that our entitlement doesn't sort of seep into socially relevant issues that we are aiming to write? I feel like I'm coming from a space of entitlement with most of the topics that I'd like to touch upon as an attempting writer. How do I make sure that entitlement is not coming the way of really bringing a holistic perspective to the social topic?
Would you know, really? You wouldn't know until you start writing. And until, I can't tell you, except from my experience, that when I write a story and then you leave it aside, then you come back to it and see whether it works or not. And if you think you speak from a place of entitlement, it'll scream in your face, And because that honesty has to work with you, in you, as a writer. It's not like a feel-good thing at all.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Madam, good evening. How you evolved yourself as a writer, briefly? What were your thoughts and what led you into being a writer, please?
I think it is life. When I started writing as an undergrad and they got published, the stories were very simple, frivolous, happy. It worked. But when I wanted to write the hard stuff, I didn't have enough life experiences or maturity or exposure and reading. If you're a writer, you have to read and read and read and read. People tell me I never read, and you can't be a writer without reading, honestly, unless you are a genius. But life happened, Life with all its experiences, You love, you grieve, you lose, you suffer, you go through, you get rejected, you get turned down, you fail again, and sometimes you win. But all the time, all those things change you as a person, and you become gentler. Your rough edges get sort of, cleaned up, and you begin to feel more. You begin to be less judgmental about what is right, what is wrong. You can't go and say this is right, this is wrong, because life isn't like that. And you're not walking in my shoes, and I'm not walking in your shoes to know that this must work for you. It doesn't. Life is not like that. And if you're open to that, the stories will then tell you their own stories. I find from my experience that if I try to push the story towards a certain action, towards a certain conclusion, they stop behaving and they become like sticks, I have to honor the story because I have to honor the craft of the writer. I have to honor the story, as it were, honor the characters, because it is their narrative, not my narrative. I'm only a conduit,
Any more questions from the audience? Before we conclude, I should say there's one more question about women's sexuality.
Yes.
That is one point that we didn't touch at all. Those who have not read Saras Manickam's My Mother Pattu, I should say that it is an unputdownable book in the sense the stories compel you to read. And before we conclude, I would like if you could answer about the treatment of women's sexuality in this particular book.
The 14 stories, I think it's not treatment, it's just the women taking ownership of their bodies, of their lives, of their choices, but always, as it works out, the women pay the price, but they pay the price willingly. They pay the price, but they still go ahead and do it. I like the stories because no one turns away from the choices. They make the choices. They look at life in the face. They refuse to be victims. They refuse to be victims. They take charge of their lives. It may be right, may be wrong, but they transcend whatever's happening and get on with it. Get on with it, I like that. We all are like that.
As we conclude this session, I can't but pay a tribute to this writer who has created characters. There are Malayali characters from Kerala. There is Indonesian maids. There is a little bit of Chinese history, how the Japanese invaded Malaysia. All those little narratives fill in the fictional canvas of Saras Manickam. And as I said, that Saras Manickam's words are sharpened knives that pierce our souls and carve a new terrain for all of us in a tradition-bound world. It is in small lapses when a mother like Pattu unleashes violence against her own daughter, Saras frees up a new linguistic and mental space for her readers. And we look forward to another powerful series of stories from you, Saras.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.